For my American multinational corporation, I decided to go with Coca-Cola, who is a massive company. They operate globally, selling their products in over 200 countries worldwide. They first went public in 1919, and they do operate in the beverage industry, selling over 3,500 different products from over 500 brands. So they are a large company, and they do hold the highest market share among the industry with 42.8%. And it is a highly competitive industry. You've got the big names like Coca-Cola, obviously, and their biggest competitor being Pepsi. Um, so with the market share of 42.8%, they do hold the top in that regard. Like I said, they sell their products in over 200 countries globally, and some of these areas of operations include Europe, the Asian Pacific, the Middle East and Africa, Latin America, and of course their home country, North America. So they do own and lease properties around the globe, which house administrative, um, manufacturing, and of course warehouse and storage properties. And these properties are generally located in the same operating region as they produce. So in the Europe and Middle East and Asia, African segments, sorry, there are six properties which are plants for manufacturing, and they do have some warehouses there as well. The Latin American segment houses five syrup plants and eight distribution warehouses, whereas the North American segment houses 11 syrup plants, nine manufacturing and bottling plants, and 35 storage facilities. So they do have the bulk of their property here in America. So the just based on the allocation of properties, we do see that they have a very large presence overseas, um, and they're uh, in 2015, the United States sales contributed to 46% of their total sales. So obviously, the rest of that is coming from foreign regions. So the company deals with over 20 currencies, but just for the sake of this project, I've chosen to focus on the top six, in which they hold the most in terms of volume. So some of their main currencies that they deal with are the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, the Swiss franc, the Chinese yen, the Egyptian pound, the euro, Great British Pound, the Hong Kong dollar, the Indian rupee, Japanese yen, Mexican peso, Swedish krona, the Turkish lira, the U.S. dollar, and the South African rand. Um, so I'll just be analyzing their net positions on the top six currencies, which are the Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, euro, Great British Pound, and Japanese yen, and also the Mexican peso. So whenever a company has a long position, they are essentially expecting the value of that currency to rise relative to the U.S. dollar. Um, and most of Coca-Cola's net positions are long, whereas if they hold a short position, it's vice versa. They're expecting this currency to drop in value relative to the U.S. dollar. So their long positions do include the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, the pound, the Japanese yen, Mexican peso, and the U.S. dollar. Um, so they are holding these currencies essentially to exchange back to U.S. dollars at a more favorable rate. Um, and their only short position in this case is the euro. Um, so they can benefit from having this long position whenever they pay most of their expenses in the U.S. dollar. And the bulk of their properties and plants are located in the U.S., as stated earlier. So, and also most of their expenses are paid in the U.S. dollar. So, whenever converting these currencies back to U.S. dollars and they're getting a more favorable rate, they're essentially making money, which is obviously a good thing. Um, and it helps boost corporate profits, which reflects in the share price. Their firm is of more value whenever they're taking part in these more favorable exchange rates. So as far as the company's correlation with these different currencies and the market, I've thrown together a correlation matrix, which which kind of shows us how these firms work with um, or not with these other currencies in the market. So I'll start with the market. Their correlation coefficient with the market is 0.612, which means that the firm does move like the market. So if the market's going up, Coke's going up as well. If the market's going down, Coke's also going down. Generally speaking, of course. And for the Australian dollar, the euro, and the British pound, we also have a positive correlation, meaning that whenever these currencies are appreciating against the dollar, Coca-Cola stock price is also increasing in value. And for those, it's just a correlation of 0.4, 0.32, and 0.22, respectively. So as far as the negative correlations, we have the Japanese yen, the Mexican peso, and also the Canadian dollar. So whenever these currencies decrease in value, the share price tends to increase in value, and vice versa. So whenever we look at Coca-Cola's performance compared to the market over our holding period, we do see that Coca-Cola performed not as well as the market. We actually achieved a negative 3.53% return, while the S&P 500, which is my chosen index of comparison, yielded 5.8%. So we do see some similarities when analyzing the graph of the performance of these two stocks, or the stock versus the index, I should say. Up until around the October 2017 timeframe, the S&P was, like I said, chosen as a comparative measure just because that's basically the standard. Coca-Cola is a component of the S&P 500, so I believe that it is a good comparison in that aspect. So the underperformance of Coke, like I said, they did achieve a negative return over our holding period. So this is basically contributed or due to the fact that there are firm-specific issues that were going on internally. Because, like I said earlier, the stock does generally move like the market, but whenever you have some type of firm-specific things going on, that can obviously affect the performance of the stock. So this happens to be the case with Coca-Cola, and during this holding period, there were a lot of major events going on. There was a CEO change. Obviously, the consumer preferences are always changing, so Coke is having to adjust their strategies and try to keep up with the evolving consumer. So this may have had some negative effects on their share price, and they also were going through a refranchising of their bottling operations. So all of these major events were going on, and they obviously played a big part in the performance of Coke stock. So the as far as hedging, in order to mitigate risk of their foreign currency exposure, they do participate in hedging anticipated exposures roughly 36 months or 3 years in advance, and they just use basic standard derivative investments. They buy forward contracts, they do commodity futures, options, collars, and swaps. So more specifically, they do enter into forward exchange contracts and purchase currency options, mostly in euros and yen. And the forward exchange contracts are also strategically used to offset the earnings impact in regards to foreign currency fluctuations. So and they've been very effective with this. They've actually, in 2016, they generated hundreds of millions of dollars in unrealized gains due to effective use of these hedging instruments. So moving on to my ADR, I decided to go with Sony Corporation, which again is another massive company who has global presence. They do operate in the technology sector with a wide range of products. They pretty much touch on everything technology related. And their main operations include designing, developing, manufacturing, and selling electronic equipment, instruments, and devices for both consumer and professional uses. So their main areas of operations include the United States, obviously Japan is their home country, Europe, China, the Asian Pacific, and quote unquote other areas. So they do own a number of offices, plants, and warehouses um, throughout the world, and most of these properties are owned by the company. So they own 11 properties in Japan, which are mostly for manufacturing purposes. Um, there are another 7 properties throughout China, Malaysia, and Singapore. And there's actually only one production facility located in the U.S., but they also do have a corporate headquarters located in New York. Um, and whenever we look at the breakdown of Sony's revenue, we do see that a bulk of their revenue does come from their home country, Japan, at 28.6% of its total revenue. But then we've got the U.S. and Europe, which are not too far behind that at 21.4% and then 23.2%. And then, of course, the other segments like China contributes to 6.7%, and the Asian Pacific about another 11.8%. So we do see that they are very dependent on countries outside of their home company home country, to produce revenue streams, and they have a large presence worldwide. So with that comes, exposure to many different currencies. Like Coke, they're exposed to over 20 currencies, but some of these include, but obviously are not limited to, the Japanese yen, which is their home currency, the Swiss franc, the Chinese yen, the euro, the British pound, the Hong Kong dollar, Japanese yen, the South Korean won, Swedish krona, the Thai baht, the Taiwan dollar, and the U.S. dollar. So I've chosen to focus on the top 6 in order to further analyze, and these 6 do include the euro, the Chinese yen, Hong Kong dollar, Japanese yen, U.S. dollar, and the Taiwan dollar. So as far as their net positions go, we see that they have 4 long positions, which include the Chinese yen, the euro, Japanese yen, and the U.S. dollar, while their 2 short positions are the Hong Kong dollar and the Taiwan dollar. So as stated previously, whenever a firm is long, whenever they have more money coming in from their customers rather than going out to their suppliers, they're essentially expecting the value of whichever currency it may be to rise over time. So this results in a more favorable exchange, and Sony is, like I said, participating in this strategic, holding of funds. Very wisely, as they've been very effective with this. So we do see that their bet on the U.S. dollar, so to speak, is essentially their biggest one, with $235 billion coming in from U.S. customers and $164 billion going out to suppliers located in the United States. So this just kind of gives you some insight as far as how they expect the U.S. dollar to perform, looking ahead into the future. And whenever we look at the firm's stock performance, I've chosen to compare the firm's stock performance to, of course, their home index, which is the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and also the S&P 500, which is the American index. So whenever we look at these, we see that as far as the correlation to Sony and the Japanese yen and the Chinese yen, we see positive correlations, meaning the stock price changes move essentially in the same direction as these exchange rates for these currencies. And the negative relationship among currencies include the euro, the Hong Kong dollar, and the Taiwan dollar. And whenever we look at the performance of Sony's stock with the Tokyo Stock Exchange Index and the S&P 500, we do see that these 2 indexes move quite similarly to one another, even though they are located in different countries. They do perform quite similar to each other. And like I said, I chose to use the Tokyo Stock Exchange just because Sony is headquartered in Tokyo, and they do trade on that specific exchange. So the S&P was also used because it is, kind of the standard here in America. So whenever we judge their stock performance against the American market, that's basically how we do that. And while they do have a positive correlation with the American market, it's rather insignificant at 0.0125 is the correlation coefficient. So we do see that it kind of moves like the market, but it's not following its every move. And during our holding period, especially, this is true because our firm Sony did outperform the market, both markets actually. During the holding period, we achieved a 35.21% return from Sony, which outperformed the U.S. market index by roughly 28%, and the Tokyo index by an even greater 30%. So around the October 2017 timeframe, we do see a massive jump in Sony's share price, which is basically from firm specific reasons. They adjusted their fiscal year end profits to a much higher number, 26% greater than what it was previously published at. And then they did hit this mark, and they exceeded the mark actually. So the market perceived that as a very positive thing, and this is a result from their massive restructuring efforts, which have been going on for years, and these have obviously started to pay off. So this kind of explains, why Sony performed the way that it did. And we did see, like I said, a massive increase in the share price in a short period of time, and it's continued to rise since then. So past our holding period to the present, it's still performing very well. And while stocks such as Sony, who operate in the technology sector, they are known to be more aggressive, more high growth. There's just no way to predict this massive jump that we see in Sony. So, like I said, it's clearly due to just firm-specific reasons because the market did not perform nearly as well, and this is very evident whenever we look at the two charts comparing these two companies, and comparing Sony to these two indexes. And according to their 20F, they do participate in hedging against foreign currency exposures. So they hedge short-term foreign currency exposures pertaining to their import and export transactions shortly before they're expected to occur. And they do obviously realize that the fluctuations in values of currencies relative to one another can have an adverse effect on their profits, and they participate in these hedging activities in order to minimize any negative things that may come up as far as foreign exchange rates amongst one another. Lastly, what I've done is I've decided to throw both of these two companies into a portfolio with one another, both holding equal weights at 50% each. So whenever we do that, we do see how both the returns and the risk, or the standard deviation in this case, become kind of smoothed out, rather than holding all the risk associated with a high growth stock, a technology stock such as Sony. Those big returns and the big risk also kind of get smoothed out by a more modest Coca-Cola. So Sony's standard deviation is 2.112%, with Coca-Cola's being 0.902. So like I said, we see Sony stock is essentially twice as risky according to this measure. But we do see much larger returns from Sony than we did from Coke. But as stated previously, during this holding period, we did see an overperformance from Sony and an underperformance from Coke. So this holding period may kind of skew data, and we definitely wouldn't want to look at this as a long-term trend, because this short holding period, could potentially skew your view on these two companies versus a more long-term outlook. So whenever we break down Sony's daily returns, we get roughly 3.18%, um, during the holding period, of course, which we did see a massive return. And Coke, like I said, they underperformed with a negative 0.031% daily return. But whenever we combine these two securities into a portfolio, we produce a 0.143 daily return and only 1.244% standard deviation. So we do realize that the returns from Sony are kind of smoothed, as I said earlier, as is the risk. So the variable that makes this work, obviously, is the correlation coefficient, and the correlation between these two firms is 0.2408. So that suggests that the firms move similarly to one another, but it's not significant enough or close enough to one, should I say, that holding both of these firms together offers no diversification benefits. So and like I said, these figures aren't the best representation, just because we've seen two drastic sides to the overperformance of Sony versus the negative return of Coke. This isn't a good basis to use as a long-term outlook. But as far as this project is concerned, this is just how it works out. So basically, holding these two securities together versus holding either Sony or either Coke proves to offer diversification benefits, and you're not only diversified across industries and sectors, but also amongst countries, which is a great thing for diversification, because sometimes firms outside of the U.S., whenever the U.S. is doing something, these firms are doing something else. So we're not taking such a big hit on a loss, and also the big gains are also kind of smoothed out. So you get a more predictable portfolio, which is exactly what we're looking for whenever we think long term. So